Good morning, everyone, and welcome to my self-assessment podcast. My name is Jessie Patel, and today I'll be reflecting on my final assessment for The Night by Elie Wiesel. Throughout this podcast, I will be discussing the process of creating my project, the choices I made, the challenges I faced, and what I've learned by studying one of the most powerful memoirs I have ever read. Before beginning the assignment, I already knew that The Night was an important memoir about the Holocaust. I understood that millions of innocent people lost their lives because of hatred, prejudice, and discrimination. It is a personal testimony that allows readers to understand the emotional, psychological, and physical suffering experienced by victims of the Holocaust. Instead of simply learning historical facts, I was able to connect Elie Wiesel's experience to a deeper level and understanding. For my first assessment, I created a slideshow presentation that explored the memoir through 4 different critical lenses. These lenses were race lenses, feminist lenses, powerless lenses, and mental health lenses. Each one of them helped me analyze the memoir from a different perspective while also connecting the events of the night to a larger social issue that continues to exist today. At first, I honestly thought the assignment was going to be straightforward. I assumed I would simply choose a few pictures, explain them, and include some quotes about the memoir. However, as I started researching and organizing my ideas, I quickly realized that creating a meaningful visual essay required much more than critical thinking than I expected. I had to carefully choose images that represented important moments from the memoir instead of selecting random pictures about the Holocaust. Each image needed to have its own purpose and connect directly to one of my critical lenses. I had to explain why each image was significant and how it helped readers better understand Elie Wiesel's experience. This requires me to think beyond what was happening in the story and analyze the larger themes that Wiesel wanted readers to remember. One of the things I appreciated about the assignment was the opportunity to combine literature and history. Usually when I complete English assignments, I mainly focus on analyzing characters, themes, and literacy devices. This project was different because it encouraged me to explore historical events while also examining different perspectives. As I researched the Holocaust, I learned about many historical details that were not fully explained in the memoir. I discovered how Nazi propaganda spread anti-Semitism through Europe, how concentration camps operated, and how millions of innocent people passed away. Learning this historical context made Elie Wiesel's experience much more heartbreaking because I understood that his story represents the experiences of countless other victims. Looking back, I think one of the strongest parts about my project was the way I connected historical evidence with the memoir. Instead of simply describing events, I explained why those events mattered and how they supported each critical lens. This helped me analyze more meaningful because I was not only discussing what happened, but I was explaining why it was important and what readers can learn from it today. This assignment also challenged me to improve my research skills. I had to find reliable sources that chose meaningful quotations and made sure all of my evidence supported my ideas. The process taught me that a strong writer can depend on strong evidence. Without evidence, opinions are weak. With evidence and a thoughtful analysis, an argument can become much more convincing and stronger. If someone asked me what I liked most about the assignment, I would say I enjoyed seeing how one memoir can be interpreted in many different ways. Before learning about the critical lens theory, I usually thought that there was only one correct interpretation of a book. The assignment showed me that literature is much more complex than what it actually is. Different readers notice different themes depending on different perspectives that they use while reading it, and each perspective reveals something valuable about the text. For example, one reader focuses on racism and discrimination, while another reader may focus on gender roles and psychological trauma. Neither interpretation is wrong. Instead, they work together to create a more complete understanding of the memoir. I found this idea especially interesting because it changed the ways I were to see literature. When I first read Night It mainly focused on the tragic events that occurred throughout the memoir. By the end of the project, however, I realized that the memoir is also about resilience, survival, memory, identity, and the importance of bearing witnesses. Elie Wiesel did not simply write Night to describe his experiences. He wrote it so future generations would never forget what happened, and we would recognize the dangers of hatred, prejudice, and indifference. As I continued working on my project, I realized that every decision I made mattered. Choosing quotations, selecting images, organizing my information, and explaining my analysis all contributed to the overall quality of my final project. I learned that a successful assignment is not completed just at once. It required planning, revision, and careful attention to detail. Overall, by creating this project, it allowed me to grow both as a reader and a writer. It strengthened my ability to analyze literature, connect historical events with textual evidence, and communicate complex ideas clearly. Throughout this assignment, it required a great detail of time and effort. I believe it helped me become more thoughtful. In the next part of my podcast, I will explain my 4 critical lenses and discussing the images I chose for my visual essay, and I described how those images helped me deepen my understanding of the book Night by Elie Wiesel. Now I'm going to explain how my digital scrapbook connects to my overall argument and how the 4 critical lenses I selected helped me develop a deeper understanding of The Night by Elie Wiesel. The main argument for the project was that by examining Night through the race critical lens, powerless critical lens, feminist critical lens, and mental health critical lens, readers can better understand the effect of anti-Semitism, oppression, trauma, and the importance of persevering survivors' voices through literature. When creating my project, my goal was not only to explain what happened during the Holocaust, but also to analyze these events and how it happened and how people were affected differently. Each critical lens allows me to examine different aspects of Elie Wiesel's experience and help me understand that it was a very devastating experience for many individuals. The first lens I explored was the race critical lens. This lens was important because in the Holocaust, it was created from the Nazis' beliefs about racial superiority. The Nazis used anti-Semitic ideology to convince society that Jewish people were inferior, which allowed discrimination, prejudice, and genocide to occur. One of the first images I included was the concentration camp gate with the phrase Arbeit macht frei, meaning work sets you free. I selected this image because it represented the deception and oppression used by the Nazi Fegemi. Although the phrase suggests hope, but in reality behind the gate it was completely different. Prisoners entering it were not entering a place where they would gain freedom. They were entering a system designed to remove their identities. This connects to Elie Wiesel's experience when he arrived at the Auschwitz and says, "I became a 7713. From then on, I had no other name, Wiesel 42. Throughout the race lens, this moment demonstrates how the Nazi attempted to erase Jewish identity by replacing names with numbers. This shows how racism ideology can lead to dehumanization of an entire group of people or just one individual. Another image I included for the race lens was the Holocaust deportation train and cattle car. I chose this image because it represents how Jewish people were transported under cruel and inhumane conditions. In Night, Elie describes a terrifying journey from the Szegedi to Birkowa, where prisoners were crowned together and treated as if they were not human. This image helped me understand that discrimination does not only begin with violence alone, but it begins with a society accepting the harmful stereotypes and allows certain groups of people to be viewed as less vulnerable than others. The second lens I chose was the powerless lens. This lens focuses on how the Nazi regime used systems of power to control oppression and remove the rights of Jewish people. For this section, I included an image of a child survivor behind barbed wires. I selected this image because it represents the complete loss of freedom and controlled experiences by Holocaust victims. Children who should have been protected were instead placed into systems where they had no power over their own lives. This connects to Elie Wiesel's experience because throughout night, Elzer loses control over almost every part of his life. He was removed from his home, separated from his family, forced into concentration camps, and was treated more of an object rather than being an actual human. The powerless lens helped me recognize the importance of human rights and the dangers of allowing governments or other institutions to have unlimited control over vulnerable groups of people. The third lens I explored was the feminist critical lens. Throughout night, it mainly focused on Ellie's personal experience, but I wanted to recognize the experiences of Jewish women and girls who were also suffering during the Holocaust. One image I selected was female prisoners in a concentrated camp. This image represents how women experienced the loss of identity, safety, and freedom under Nazis' oppression. Although Ellie's story focuses mainly on her own survival, the separation of his mother and younger sisters, Tzopria and Berkiwa, shows the suffering experienced by women and families during the Holocaust. Throughout the feminist lens, I learned that historical narratives often focus on certain voices, while other experiences become overlooked. Including this perspective allowed my project to recognize the suffering of resilience of women during the Holocaust. The final lens that I explored was the mental health critical lens, which was one of the most meaningful sections of my project, which is why I saved it for last. This lens examines the emotional and psychological effects of trauma caused by violence, fear, and dehumanization. The most significant quote that I analyzed was from the depths of the miner. A corpse gazed back at me. The look in his eyes as they stared into mine has never left me. Wiesel 119. I chose this quote because it shows that the effect of the Holocaust continued even after Ellie's physical survival. When Elie described himself as a corpse, he was showing that the Holocaust damaged not only his entire body, but also his identity, emotions, and sense of hope. The image I included for the lens is the lasting impact of the Holocaust trauma through survivors and memorials. This helped demonstrate that trauma does not disappear when the historical event ends. Survivors continue carrying memories, grief, and emotional pain throughout their lives. Another important quote I included in my project was, "Never shall I forget that night, the first night in the camp, which has turned my life into one long night, 7 times cursed and 7 times sealed." Wiesel 34. This quote represents the moment when Ellie's life changed forever. The metaphor of one long night symbolizes the fear, suffering, and darkness that followed him after entering the concentration camps. Overall, these 4 critical lenses work together to create a more complete understanding of the night. The race lens shows how anti-Semitism created systems of discrimination. The powerless lens shows how oppression removed human rights and freedom. The feminist lens highlighted experiences that were often overlooked. The mental health lens reveals the lasting emotional consequences of trauma. Throughout this project, I learned that studying literature through different perspectives allows readers to recognize voices that have historically been ignored or silenced. This connects directly to the idea of decolonizing literature because it encourages us to include diverse experiences and understand history from multiple viewpoints. In the next section, I will reflect on my personal writing process, the challenges I face, what I learned from the assignment, and how I can improve as a writer for future assignments. Now I will be reflecting on my overall experience completing this assignment and answering the self-assessment questions and discussing what I've learned throughout the process of creating my visual essay on the Night by Elie Wiesel. The first question asks, what do I like best about the assignment? The thing I liked best about the assignment was that it allowed me to explore the night in a deeper and more meaningful way. Instead of only reading the memoir and summarizing what happened, I was able to analyze the text through different critical perspectives. This helped me understand that literature is not limited to only one interpretation. A story can reveal different meanings depending on the questions we asked and the perspectives we used. I especially enjoyed being able to connect the memoir to real historical events through images and evidence. Choosing visuals for my project allowed me to understand the Holocaust in a more personal way because I was not only reading about the event, but I was also seeing the reality behind it. Each image represented real people and real experiences, which made the analysis more emotional and meaningful. The second question asks, when I look back at the assignment, what part did I enjoy working on the most? The part I enjoyed working on the most was selecting and analyzing my images for my digital scrapbook. At first, I thought when I chose images, it would have to be a more easier part of the assignment, but then I quickly realized that every image needed to have a deeper purpose and deeper understanding. I had to consider how each picture connected to my critical lens and how it supported my understanding of the night. For example, when choosing images related to the race lens, I focused on symbols that represented anti-Semitism, discrimination, and loss of human rights. For my mental health lens, I focused on images that represented trauma, memory, and the emotional effects of the Holocaust. This process allowed me to think more critically about how visual information can be communicated through different powerful messages. The third question asks, what was the most difficult part of the project? The most difficult part of the project was balancing the description and the analysis. In the beginning, I found myself explaining what would happen in the images or what happened in the memoir, but I realized that a strong analysis requires going beyond basic information. I had to explain why something was significant and why it connected to larger themes. Another challenge was using 3 different critical lenses without making my ideas repetitive. Since all 3 lenses connected to suffering and discrimination, I had to carefully organize my ideas so that each perspective showed something unique about the memoir. This challenge helped me become a stronger writer because I learned that evidence analysis is not only finding evidence, but it's also about explaining the importance about the evidence and connecting it to a larger argument. The fourth question asks, I believe I was most successful at creating meaningful connections between the evidence from the night and the critical lenses that I used. Instead of simply including quotations or images, I focused on explaining how they supported my overall understanding of the memoir. For example, when analyzing Elie Wiesel's experience, I was able to connect his personal suffering and larger themes such as dehumanization, loss of identity, trauma, and the importance of remembering history. I also believe I was successful at organizing my project in a way that allowed each section to build off the previous one. The fifth question asks, what one thing I learned about the assignment was? One thing I learned that was important about the assignment was that literature can teach us about history, humanity, and the experiences of others. Before completing this project, I viewed Night as mainly a memoir about one person's experience during the Holocaust. However, after analyzing it through different critical lenses, I realized that it also represented broader issues such as racism, discrimination, trauma, and consequences of hatred. I also learned the importance of persevering survivor stories. Elie Wiesel's memoir shows why remembering historical events is necessary. When societies forget about the past, they risk repeat the same mistakes. Literature like Night gives future generations the opportunity to learn from history and understand the importance of compassion and equity. The sixth question asks, I would assess my work on this assignment as outstanding. I believe my final project demonstrated strong effort, creativity, and critical thinking. I did not simply complete the requirements of the assignment. I tried to create a project that showed a deeper understanding of the memoir and the historical context behind it. I believe my strongest achievement was the way I combined visual elements, literary evidence, and critical analysis. Each part of my project worked together to communicate the importance of Elie Wiesel's message and the need to remember the experiences of the Holocaust victims. Although I believe my work was successful, I also understand that there's always room for improvement. Completing this assignment showed me areas where I can grow as a student. The seventh question asks, one thing I need to improve in my next assignment. One thing I need to improve in my next assignment is developing my analysis even further. Sometimes I focus heavily on explaining evidence, but I can also continue by improving and creating deeper connections between my examples and my main argument. I also want to improve my planning process by creating a stronger outline before beginning my final draft. Having a clear structure earlier will allow me to organize my ideas more effectively and spend more time improving my analysis instead of focusing on organization at the end. My final question asks, one goal I would like to focus on the future is becoming a more confident and effective academic writer. I want to continue improving my ability to create strong arguments, analyze information from multiple perspectives, and communicate complex ideas clearly. The assignment showed me that strong writing is not only about giving good information, but it's also about understanding the information, making connections, and presenting ideas in a more meaningful way. Moving forward, I would want to apply these skills I developed from the project to future assignments in English and also other subjects. To conclude, completing the final assessment on The Night by Elie Wiesel was a valuable learning experience. This project helped me understand the importance of critical thinking, historical awareness, and viewing literature in different perspectives. From the race lens, feminist lens, and mental health lens, and powerless lens, I was able to recognize many layers within Wiesel's memoir and understand how one story can represent the experiences of millions of others. My biggest lesson I would take away from the experience is the importance of remembering history and learning from the experiences of others. Night is not only a story about suffering, it is also a reminder of the strength of survivors and the responsibility of future generations have to prevent hatred and discrimination. Thank you for listening to my self-assessment podcast. This project helped me grow as a reader, writer, and critical thinker, and I carry the lessons I learned into my future work.